It's not, but let's move on because it's not age that's in question. It's the nationality of the players that is in question. So, Haresh, can you just give us a quick overview, if you can do a quick overview of this situation of how we ended up here, and importantly, the the changes that were recently made to the national team setup, and what role that has played in all of this situation. If you can sort of quickly surmise that, if you can.
Well, I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. So, FAM had in June, FAM as in the FA of Malaysia, had in June submitted the names of 7 heritage footballers to play in the AFC Asian Cup qualifier. It was against Vietnam, and Malaysia won the match 4-0. Now, right after the match, a report was lodged by God knows who, because there are a lot of accusations, but no one can actually provide proper proof as to who actually lodged. But the report was lodged to FIFA, and FIFA initiated investigations. And upon investigation, FIFA found that FAM had allegedly provided, and I quote, doctored documentation to FIFA. And what we've seen immediately after that is that FIFA slapping the FA of Malaysia and 7 of the said players with sanctions, as you rightfully pointed out earlier on the show. And FAM has since appealed against the decision. And the thing is that the grounds of FAM's appeal remain unclear, but the incident has certainly opened a can of worms. We are hoping for an answer by FIFA by October 30th. But I'm not too sure that if they will make an announcement on 30th, which is today, as we're recording, or the announcement could be made on 31st. Nevertheless, as I mentioned earlier, this incident has pretty much opened a can of worms and got the whole nation, football lovers and non-football lovers, talking. Simply because, number one, these players obtained their citizenship in record time. They applied in January and they got their citizenship in May. That's pretty fast, yeah. Number two,
Sorry, Harris. How
sorry,
quickly? How long would it normally take for the naturalisation process if a regular guy like myself wanted to go and live in Malaysia, wanted to get nationalised, naturalised, etc.? What would be the normal time period rather than 5 months?
there is no normal time period because it's based on you know it's based on the National Registration Department. Yeah, and to answer your question as to why I keep saying that it's record time is simply because we still have people out there, individuals out there, who have been waiting for years to be recognized, some even decades to be recognized. And they've been in the country way longer. They speak the language, they sing the national anthem, but they are not recognized as Malaysian. So this process has pretty much hit a raw nerve. So as you can tell, the conversation now is no longer about football, but it's about basic human rights. So yeah, that's the biggest issue that we're facing at the moment. And also the fact that, as I wanted to mention earlier, FAM claimed that there was a technical error when submitting the document. It's pretty odd, simply because it's not like we've never done this before. FAM has been submitting applications. The eligibility of the other players. It's not new. We've had naturalized heritage players in the past. No issues. Um, what happened this time around, and what was that particular error? God knows, because once again, it's not been justified or explained properly. Yeah, and I think the other interesting bit that has got everyone talking is the fact that the CEO of the national team, Rob Friend, he had at the initial press conference said that there were 3 entities in the FA of Malaysia: the region of Johor, the national team, and the national body. But he later clarified, because when I asked him, uh, 3, because there's only one and one body that's affiliated to FIFA, and he said that, oh yes, there's only one, that's only FAM, but within it there are 3 groupings and so forth and so on. And more importantly, I'm sorry, I don't mean to take up too much of your time, but more importantly is this one bit, yeah? Who recommended the players? Who is the agent? What was the paperwork? Is it a situation whereby the FA of Malaysia scammed? Yes, I'm going to use that word simply because if everything was in order, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Correct? Yeah.
Yeah. There are so many questions and so very few answers that have been provided throughout this this whole saga since, as I said, FIFA dropped that bomb. But from the outside looking in, it seems like there was always some level of cynicism around these naturalizations from the moment that the players were identified to the moment they got the naturalizations. Given the lack of details and clarity that came with the announcements about like how were these players eligible for Malaysia, there was no details given. I know the example was used of Indonesia when they naturalized their players. They give the details of these are their grandparents, these are their details, this is where they're from. There was none of that provided, and it was almost shrouded in a little bit of secrecy, which then probably led to more questions and more cynicism. So can you just sort of explain that to us when it all started coming through, the sort of the cynicism that existed within the football fraternity about the eligibility of these players and where, as I said, where they came from?
You see, if you had witnessed or watched the first press conference, or should I say the only press conference by the FA of Malaysia, which was on October 17, I had asked that particular question. I said, why the 7 players? Why not Haresh Deol? If you realize, I actually asked that question. I mean, justify why these 7 players? What makes these 7 players special? And the answer was not forthcoming. Who brought these 7 players? Once again, the answer was not forthcoming. Later, in the subsequent press conference, we were informed that there were about 26 or 27 odd players that were recommended by agents, and only 7 um, made the cut. Now, once again, what is the justification? Um, I mean, where's the link? Who are they related to? Is there any proper documentation? So forth and so on. And the irony is that why is it that a sports body like FIFA is able to verify and obtain proper documentation? Instead, a government body, which is the National Registration Department in Malaysia, would have just picked up the phone and called the embassy and G to G and find out, hey, is this for real, or are these documents correct? So once again, this whole saga has raised a whole lot of questions, Paul.
And just looking a bit broader, just wanting to go back to touch on an issue that you raised before, because Malaysia has naturalized players before. Malaysia has had heritage players before. So this isn't a new issue, but I know the issue of naturalization is a particularly thorny one in Malaysia for the reason that you mentioned. There are people who have lived there for years and for decades that don't have the citizenship yet. Yet, there are footballers that can get their applications fast tracked. And in this case, even fast tracked, if I can put it like that. Can you just explain to our listeners sort of why that is and how important sort of that national identity is to Malaysians, and why this issue is so particularly thorny?
I mean, as I mentioned, why it's thorny is simply because, as I mentioned earlier, there are many people out there who want to be identified as Malaysians, but they are not given the opportunity to do so. They are unable to conduct businesses. They are unable to vote. Simple basic rights, attend school, and enjoy the benefits that a Malaysian enjoy. In fact, if you want to pump petrol right now, if you're a Malaysian, you get subsidized fuel. If you're not a Malaysian, you don't even enjoy that. You see? So yeah, there are perks, there are benefits of having that identification card. But yeah, I mean, coming back to football and why it's being fast tracked. I mean, look, who ordered this fast track? Who allowed this fast track? Now, those questions remain in the air. But yeah, people are naturally upset simply because what makes these footballers special? Why not the others who could also justify that they too contribute to the nation's economy? They too contribute to the nation's well-being. What is the justification? Now, on the football point of view, perhaps this is a quick fix to, you know, climb up the FIFA rankings, um, put up a pretty picturesque scene about the national football team so that sponsors will be attracted and then the development will, while the development process continues, so that there is continuation of sponsorship and yada yada yada. I think Michael, you would understand where I'm coming from.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen other countries try to do that as well. The likes of the Philippines, for example, who they bring through those mixed heritage players. They use them, and then the idea is that the profile that those players give the national team and the sport within the country brings in greater investment. That investment then goes into development, and it's part of it's the sharp end of a longer sort of thought out development program where ultimately you end up with a national team and a football ecosystem that can boast these mixed heritage players and locally developed players too, and ultimately they feed off each other, and it develops and improves the situation for sure.
You see, Michael, what you just pointed out should have been a narrative from day one. That should have been used as a justification as to why, okay, we need to do this simply because this is the fast track way to get sponsors, to get the eyeballs, to create attention towards the national team while we are building. But no, that did not happen. Instead, it was like, we are doing it, and there's no justification.
Just touching on what you mentioned there, Michael, I want to come to you because there is a bit of an arms race now, it seems, when it comes to naturalisation in Asia in particular, but around the world as well, which isn't a particularly new phenomenon. We've seen, I mean, look what's happening with the UAE and what they've done in terms of naturalisation. Indonesia as well is probably the best example of recent times, and perhaps that's had some impact on Malaysia and sort of wanting to replicate what's happened there because we know the rivalry between the two countries. But as you said, the Philippines, one that's sort of flying under the radar at the moment is Sri Lanka, who basically field now a team entirely of naturalised players and are actually doing well in Asian Cup qualifying and getting some results. We know what happened in the past with Timor-Leste and the Brazilians and the penalties that happened there. Was something like this then almost inevitable to happen, given the gains that can be made when you look at someone like Indonesia and how that's fast-tracked their development, the gains that can be made in a short space of time and what's at stake when you think about World Cup qualifications and the like? Was something like this almost inevitable to happen, that someone would try and really push the boundaries?
I think so, and as you've mentioned there just in the question, Timor-Leste got caught, so there's already a precedent has been set with regards to bringing in players who maybe don't fulfill the criteria as they should do, and then punishment being handed out by FIFA and the other authorities. So Malaysia are kind of going down that route, it would appear. I mean, look, I don't want to prejudge anything. That it could be that they appeal and that there's a piece of paper found somewhere that says that, well, actually this was all above board. But it's all it's certainly not looking good. And as you say, this whole natural FIFA amending their rules, and even in terms of residency, changing it. I think it used to be 7 years, now it's 5. Countries looking to fast track, exactly as you say. You have an expanded World Cup of 48 teams. You now have 8 or 9 Asian nations qualifying, but it's also, I mean, it's obviously it's not just confined to Asia. And the last World Cup was the perfect example of what you can do if a country taps in successfully to its diaspora. Look at Morocco. Morocco got to the semi-finals of the World Cup. Before the tournament, very, very few people would have seen that coming. It's funny. An old late friend of ours, a friend of the podcast, Pim Verbeek, used to be a technical director in Morocco. And I remember having this conversation with him a number of years ago, and him saying back then, this was maybe 8-9 years ago, that Morocco would be a coming force because they're doing exactly that. They were tapping into the diaspora, and there was an expectation. So you look at an example like that, and that's probably in some respects the ultimate example, certainly in recent years. Although even the likes of Cameroon, Ivory Coast, with the number of France-born players that they have, all based of the history of that country, those countries and their colonial pasts and the impact that those have. I think the issue with Malaysia is that it's very difficult. I think if these players were coming from the UK, for example, I think you could see more of a connection, because there's obviously the connection between the UK and Malaysia going back as part of the colonial history. Looking at players coming in from South America, it kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. And again, I'm not suggesting that anything untoward has been done. Maybe it is all above board, and maybe the appeal will find in FAM's favor. I don't know, but it certainly it looks unusual. But as you say, when you look at the success or relative success that Indonesia have had, reaching that fourth round of World Cup qualifying, knocking on the door of a place at a World Cup for the first time since the country gained independence in the 1940s. They've been hugely successful, and if they can keep that team together, they're going to be ever more of a force within the Asian game, and especially, when you look at what they could do within Southeast Asia as a region. I mean, really, you would look at this team if they can, say if they can keep it going, they're going to become the dominant force in Southeast Asia very, very quickly if they're not that already. So yeah, it's an arms race. Everybody's looking at a way to keep, to keep pace with countries that are able to do that, because say Indonesia have been above board. It's all been approved by FIFA. The work and time and effort put in by people like Eric Tohier, the PSSI president, it's paying off.
Coming back to you, Haresh, the elephant in the room that we have to talk about is the involvement of TMJ, the Crown Prince of Johor, in all of this, because he was effectively given control of the national team. As I said, it was its own entity within the Football Association of Malaysia. It has its own dedicated CEO, deputy CEO. It is its own unit that is overseen by TMJ. He had a press conference recently that I believe you are at. What did he have to say about this whole situation?
Okay. Let's clarify this. Yeah. He is at this point in time not the crown prince. He's actually the regent of Johor, because his dad is now our king, the Malaysia's king. Yeah. He's pretty much the ruler of the state in Johor. So now, the regent of Johor held a okay, I don't know how to construct this in proper sentence, because it's not like a situation whereby he or perhaps he called for a press conference. I'm not too sure. But anyway, the reason why I'm saying this is because I asked the first question. Um, the backdrop had FAM logos everywhere. There was an FAM bunting at the side. I got the invite from an FAM staff, and my first question to him was, "What are you doing there?" Because this is an FAM. I mean, an FAM official should be there. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, His Royal Highness is not an FAM official. I mean, nothing is written in black and white that he is. So yeah, that was my first question. I mean, because I wanted to establish the rules of engagement, I needed to know who I'm talking to. Am I talking to the region of Johor? Am I talking to the owner of Johor Darul Takzim, the club, the football club? Or am I talking to a sponsor of the national team? Or was he appointed as president that we didn't know about? So yeah, I had to establish the rules of engagement, and to which I'm pretty sure you heard his answer. And so coming back to your question about his role, and based on his answer and based on what I understand, he's basically a facilitator. So is there anything wrong with that? I don't think so. I mean, you've got a person with money, with influence, with standing, who wants to help. Would you say no? Correct. But here's the thing. Um, are you intimidated by his money, his power, and his influence? Because the FA of Malaysia surely is. And when that happens, can you then function? Because based on how he explained himself, His Royal Highness, during the whole press conference, and what had happened transpired before, it seems to suggest whereby the FA of Malaysia has got no leadership. They just don't know what they're doing. If the national coach can go on record to say that, but for the region of Johor, they wouldn't be getting chartered flights, they wouldn't be getting good accommodation, they wouldn't be training at good facilities. So then you ask yourself, what exactly is FAM doing? Merely uploading documents? And that too was a technical error. So, I mean, you understand where I'm coming from?
Harish, in terms of where this rates in the history of um, momentous occasions within Malaysian football. Obviously, those of us who have sort of been around for a long time, we're fully aware of the fact that Malaysia and Malaysians pride themselves on the successes that the country had in the sort of 60s and 70s. And any of us who have ever been to Malaysia and talked to anybody who is sort of over the age of 60 have been bored ridged about Mokhtar Dari and Santokh Singh. We've heard the story so many times that you kind of just get, it all gets a bit sort of, repetitive, but completely understand the country has a great heritage, a great history, football, Olympic qualification, all of that in the 70s, one of the strongest teams in Asia. To have then gone through those periods and to then have something like this happening where the game in Malaysia is largely being ridiculed for what is going on here. There's been other low points, and the obvious one is the 1994 match fixing scandal, when was it 100 or more players were involved in fixing games. Numerous players were banned for life. Many of those were even banished to far-flung corners of the country, not even allowed to sort of be in the company of, never mind friends, but either family as well. So the country has a history, or at least has a checkered history. There have been very great highs, but there have obviously been lows as well. But then when we look at where Malaysia was going into this, qualifying for the Asian Cup for the first time in a very long time, and not just that, but then performing well, and the great result against the South Koreans in the group stages, and really sort of re-establishing some credibility for the Malaysia national team. So where does this leave everything now, and where does it fit in the context of the country's footballing history?
Oh, where does it fit? No, no, it's a valid question. It's a valid question. It's a question that will invoke a roller coaster of emotions in any fan, in any Malaysian. You get your parents talking about, like you rightfully pointed out, the same old, it's so repetitive that commercials and advertisements till today, when it comes to a Merdeka, an independence scene, yeah, or something to inspire us, we still fall back to the guys you mentioned earlier, the late Mokhtar Dari, Santokh Singh, and the whole team. Yeah, that is one bit of it. And then the match fixing scandal is something that we would all like to forget, because it crippled the league. It crippled the national team as well. And then we had a little rejuvenation. That was when Dato Raja Gopal was the national coach. Yeah, we had the likes of Safi Salih and yeah, the twins, and they created an impact. Remember the match against what do you call Indonesia, where they yeah. Anyway, so that was that little rejuvenation there.
That was the 2012 Suzuki Cup, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah.
And yeah. So then moving forward, you would think that a country which is Malaysia, that once taught the Japanese how to run football. Yes, if you remember when Datuk Paul Mani, the late Paul Mani, was with the FA of Malaysia. A delegation from Japan FA came to FAM to learn how we ran our league, how we ran our administration, and to compare the two nations today at this present time. Now it's extremely hurtful, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you know,
So,
I
but
mean,
in
so
terms of in those terms, then
yeah.
where would you place this as a, I don't want to use necessarily the word scandal, but as an occurrence.
No, I mean,
Where would you place this in terms of the
Michael,
history of Malaysian
Michael,
football?
it's a scandal. Let's not
Okay,
sugarcoat this.
sure.
It is a scandal. Yeah. It's a scandal that has grabbed international headlines. It's an unfortunate incident, and it's just a situation whereby we just keep digging ourselves deeper into the hole. For example, we've suspended, or the FA of Malaysia has suspended its Secretary General, correct? Yeah. But yet, he was at the event whereby FIFA and ASEAN signed a memorandum of understanding. What was his capacity there? Who invited him there? You see, these type of questions keep cropping up. So then people are demanding, where's the accountability? Where's the transparency? Where's the integrity? So yes, it is a massive issue. And coming back to what you asked me earlier, I would say it is as big, if not bigger, than the match fixing scandal. Different context, apples and oranges. I understand, and I think we need to make that clear. But a subject that has caught the whole nation talking, even during a festive season called Deepawali, this was the main topic of conversation. Yeah. So it's I mean, as much as we can laugh about it, but it's sad. It's sad. It's unfortunate, and it's a bruise to the nation's ego. If you ask me, on a larger scale.
Just before we finish up on this topic, and we'll come on to talking about that FIFA and ASEAN thing in a moment, Haresh, that I want to talk about. But where does this go
what
from?
FIFA and ASEAN? No, Paul. What FIFA and ASEAN thing?
No one has
Anyway,
any.
I'll come back to that later. No one has any clue about it.
No one has any answers for that one either. It's a common theme of this. Lots of questions, no answers. But where does this go from here? As you said, FIFA were had until sort of today, the 30th of October. We don't know when they're going to make an announcement or a determination, one way or another. But where does this go from here? And if it is worst case scenario that the appeal is rejected and it's upheld that Malaysia did doctor these documents, where does Malaysian football go from here?
Okay, Paul, Michael, let's be very clear. FIFA would not have initiated this if they did not have anything in black. Yeah. Okay, they have got a bigger reputation, and their reputation is at stake, and they don't want to set a precedent of just simply hauling up nations and only to be proven um, wrong later. Yeah, okay, because that would then be the bigger story, correct? FIFA, suspending. I think that would be a bigger story than this. But anyway, coming back to what I wanted to say is that now this has happened, and w- while there are many others who are demanding for a complete reset, um, we need more, transparency. We need more accountability in the whole system. And when I say system, it's like the whole ecosystem within FAM and beyond. My fear is that a heavy penalty or even a suspension against the national body would only kill the passion of the younger kids who have got no fault in this. I'm talking about your age groups, your under 16s and your under 19s. They are playing in tournaments. They don't know about this. They don't want to know about this. All they want to do is just play football. And then if the national body is handed heavy bans, including suspensions, these poor kids are going to be deprived of that opportunity to play. And the fact that they don't play a year, I mean, look, if we don't go to the gym for a month and we feel sluggish, imagine these athletes who do not play for a year. They pretty much say bye-bye and do something else altogether. So we're going to lose a generation. Now, as much as FAM needs to learn from this lesson, but a hard penalty would not just only what do you call penalize the FA, but the whole ecosystem, and that's pretty unfair to the kids. And I don't think they deserve it.
Do you think that's a possibility, that there's an actual across the board ban of FAM being involved, or will we see just a doubling down in terms of the sanction that's already been handed out to the players and that heavy fine that was handed to FAM, and then laterally, as we all expect, that once this appeal, if it does fail, that Malaysia is stripped of the points that it has accumulated in Asian Cup qualifying while those players have been fielded, so they lose the last, well, maybe not the last two games, because obviously they didn't play against Laos in both of those games, but certainly the games in June.
Well, the way I see it, look, we've been having these conversations back home I mean in Kuala Lumpur as well, and we're wondering what's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario would be, and once again, it's unfair for us to even have this conversation simply because we don't know what FAM had appealed against. Yeah, so we are just basing it on one side, which is what FIFA had said because they have made their documents transparent. I think we need to hear FAM out as well. But just for conversation's sake, um, it looks like FIFA needs to have I mean, they need to show that this is wrong. Yeah, they need to set a precedent, and this needs to be served as a warning to the other nations as well. Because as the both of you had mentioned earlier, there's this race of wanting to naturalize as many players as possible, to climb up the ladder and to do well in the regional tournaments. So this could be the handbrake that FIFA has been longing, and to tell, like the warning that FIFA can then inform the other member states that, hey, look here, you know, you want to find players, go, but make sure that it's done properly. But would they go to the extent of banning FAM? That would pretty much kill the spirit of the sport altogether. I mean, there's no government interference. Perhaps they may be lenient and go like, FAM will claim that, hey, look, our government has given them citizenship. So we are basing on that. Perhaps, I don't know. I mean, but I mean, it's unfair for me to say anything at this point in time, but I think it will maintain. Even the bans towards the players as well. And what's more important is even if they reduce the ban, Michael, let's say for example they reduce it to 3 months. Okay, now my question is, look, 3 months is a long time for professional footballers, correct? Yeah. Will they then initiate legal action against the FAM for loss of income?